All characters and events described in this story are fictitious. Any similarities with real people or situations are purely coincidental. Please do not judge strictly. Every author was once a beginner. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Don't forget to like, share your life experiences, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story. Xavier Lowry had been standing at the front door of his Portland home for about 20 minutes, trying to sort out his own feelings. My soul was restless, and an incomprehensible feeling of anxiety was growing. He returned a little later than usual. A project at work was delayed, and then he had to stop at the supermarket for groceries. Freya usually waited for him in the kitchen. She loved to greet her husband, pull off his jacket, sometimes touch his wrist, as if checking if he was too tired. But today there was a strange silence in the house. "Freya," he called, receiving no answer, entering the living room. The table at which she liked to work stood by the window overlooking a small garden. The countertop, oddly enough, was in impeccable order, but it was not this that caught the eye, but the untouched cup of coffee. "Freya, are you here?" He repeated a little louder, taking a few steps deeper into the room. No response. He put the bag of groceries on the floor and looked around. Freya's laptop was closed and turned off, and she almost never turned it off entirely. There was a phone nearby, but the screen was black. When he picked up the device, he realized that it was discharged. "Strange," Xavier muttered, pressing the power button. "Why is it discharged?" Lately, Freya seemed distracted and often complained of tiredness, but she definitely wouldn't let her phone run out completely, because she needed it for work and contacting clients. He walked slowly into the corridor. Freya's coat, which she was wearing now in the fall, was missing from the hanger, and her favorite boots were not nearby, but the car keys were lying on the bookcase by the door. It seemed strange. Freya never went out without her keys. Maybe she ran out somewhere in a hurry. Xavier thought out loud. But why then was the phone turned off and the keys left? Xavier decided to inspect the house more carefully. He went into the bedroom. The bed, which Freya had carefully made in the morning, remained untouched. There was no sign that she was getting ready to travel. No suitcase, no bag, no note. I wanted to believe that she had gone to the store or to a neighbor's, but all the options that came to mind were crushed by obvious facts. Only her coat and shoes were missing. "You can't just leave," he muttered. Having dialed the number of Freya's best friend, Xavier immediately heard a surprised voice. "Hello, Xav. What's happened?" asked a friend, yawning. "Hello, Rebecca. Listen, did Freya drop by chance? She left her things at home and disappeared somewhere." "No," Rebecca's voice sounded slightly worried. "We haven't seen her or talked on the phone for a couple of days." "What? He doesn't answer at all?" "Her phone is dead at home," Xavier muttered, looking around the empty living room. "Maybe she wrote to you on social networks." "No, I don't. It's been quiet in recent days." "Do you know when she was online in instant messengers?" "I have no idea." He sighed. "This is all strange." After hanging up the phone, Xavier realized that he was running out of time. He felt uneasy about the silent house, in which Freya's absence was suddenly so keenly felt. He called several more friends and acquaintances, asking the same question, but could not find an answer. No one has seen Freya since the morning. No one has heard about her plans. My heart sank with a bad feeling. He had no idea where she could have gone. The last time they saw each other was in the morning, as usual. Freya was preparing breakfast, then Xavier rushed off to work. The farewell kiss was somehow absent-minded. She looked slightly depressed, but did not give the appearance that anything had happened. And he, always immersed in his projects, did not have time to ask her about her mood. Anxiety, having captured his mind, did not recede. Suddenly, a thought occurred to him. What if something bad happened? He dialed 911. "Portland Police, how can we help?" A calm female voice was heard. "My wife's name is Freya Lowry. I can't find her. She disappeared." He began to explain hastily, feeling his voice tremble. "Can you send me the outfit? I don't know what to do." Calm down, sir. Give me the address. Let's record the information. Having dictated the address, Xavier felt his hands shaking. Putting down the phone, he forced himself to sit on the sofa and tried to remember any strange things in the past few days. Freya became less sociable, talked less about her work, and often spent time on the internet. But disappearing without warning is not like her. The minutes seemed like hours. He jumped up every now and then, walked around the house in circles, checked the front door and windows. Everything was locked from the inside, although they hardly used the exit to the backyard. He glanced at the half-drunk cup of coffee on the table, the image of his wife, who usually neatly put away the dishes immediately after drinking, immediately appeared in his thoughts. "Freya, where are you?" he whispered, touching the edge of the cup. Half an hour later, a signal sounded at the door. The blue and red lights of the police car were reflected in the living room window. Xavier rushed to the entrance and opened the door. Standing in the doorway was Detective Lyle Turner, a stocky man in his late 50s with tired blue eyes, wearing a threadbare raincoat. Next to him is a young partner. It seems to be Officer Ramirez, judging by his uniform and identification badge. "Good evening. Did you call about the missing person?" Turner began, going inside and quickly looking around the room. "Yes, my wife, Freya. I came back from work and—" Xavier paused, catching his breath. He had to consciously force himself to speak slowly so that the police could get the message. "She's not at home, her phone is dead, her keys and bag are there, but her coat and boots are missing. I called all our friends, no one knows where she is." "Calm down, Mr. Lowry," Turner said in a low, even voice. "Let's sit down. You will tell everything in order." They moved into the living room, where Xavier sat on the sofa and Turner and his partner settled into armchairs. Officer Ramirez pulled out a notepad and pen. "Start this morning. How did your day usually go?" Turner asked, leaning forward slightly. "I got up around 7 in the morning," Xavier began. Freya was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. We had breakfast together, our usual routine. Then I went to work. It must have been about 8. Nothing special happened. "And you haven't seen her since then?" the detective clarified. "Yes. I returned around 7 in the evening," he explained. "It was dark at home. I walked in and everything looked strange. The coffee on the table is cold, the laptop is turned off, the phone is dead. No coat or boots." Turner considered this for a moment, then nodded to Officer Ramirez. "Write it down. This means that she disappeared approximately between 8 in the morning and 7 in the evening." "Yes," confirmed Xavier. "But we usually call each other if someone is delayed." "Didn't you have any disagreements, quarrel?" the detective asked. "No," Xavier answered, although deep down he felt a pang of doubt. In recent weeks, Freya really wasn't herself, but there were no big conflicts between them. "We lived together for 7 years, of course. There were misunderstandings, but nothing serious." Turner looked at him appraisingly. The detective's tired eyes glanced around the living room, lingering on a cup of coffee and a closed laptop. "Fine. I'll have Officer Ramirez look at the house. Do you mind?" "Of course not." As Ramirez walked up to the second floor, Turner asked, "Tell me, did your wife have any reason to leave home? Maybe she went to visit relatives or went on vacation?" "No, I called her sister, but she doesn't know anything," Xavier answered. "Freya did not plan any trips. You will remember the last conversations. Maybe she had a new hobby, new acquaintances." Turner continued, "We must consider any versions." Xavier spread his hands in confusion. "I can't say for sure. She was working on a project. Although yes, she has been on the internet a lot lately. But I didn't go into details. I'm also stuck at work." "I understand," the detective nodded. "We will send a technical team. They can check her laptop if necessary. On your part, it will be legal. You are a spouse and the owner of the property." "Yes, check anything," Xavier said, shuddering internally. The thought that something terrible could happen to his wife made him nervous. At that moment, Officer Ramirez appeared. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, tilting her head to the side. No signs of a struggle, sir. The house is in order, but it is really clear that she left in her outer clothing without taking her bag and keys. Very unusual, Ramirez reported. It doesn't look like she was planning on leaving for long. Turner looked at Xavier. Are you sure she couldn't leave voluntarily? Absolutely. Turner nodded understandingly. Clear. Then we will consider her missing under suspicious circumstances. I'll fill out the paperwork, and we'll put her on the wanted list. The words, missing under suspicious circumstances, made Xavier's heart clench. Everything seemed unreal. He looked at the detective, realizing that something terrible was beginning as if in a bad dream. Thank you. He squeezed out, barely moving his lips. What will happen next? We will enter her data into the database of missing persons, Turner explained in a softer tone. We'll check the street surveillance cameras that could have recorded her leaving the house or getting into the car. Let's try to find out if she appeared at train stations or at the airport. Experts will come to you to check your laptop and phone. There was an awkward silence, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Xavier remembered how he and Freya chose this watch at a craft market in Seattle from a master who made things in a vintage style. Back then, they loved all the little things they found for their home. Now this memory seemed distant and bitter, as if life was split into before and after. I'll go and fill out the paperwork, said Officer Ramirez. If further information is needed, I will contact you, Mr. Lowry. Okay, he replied, and the officer left the living room. Detective Turner remained, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Mr. Lowry, may I ask, did your wife show any signs of depression? Maybe she was complaining about life. For the first time, Xavier thought about it seriously. Yes, Freya looked sad lately and felt, as she said, a creative crisis. But depression? To leave like this? I don't know. Maybe she was bored, but she didn't say anything about leaving. Everything was quite calm with us. Okay, it's too early to draw conclusions now, Turner muttered, standing up. I understand it's hard for you, but try not to panic. We will do everything we can to find her. Stay connected. Xavier walked him to the door. Closing the door behind the detective, Xavier slowly walked around the house. He picked up a bag of groceries from the floor, but he was not at all interested in what was inside. I put the bag in the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, but didn't even notice what was in it. There was a fog of anxiety in his eyes. Freya, where are you? He whispered into the void, resting his forehead on his hand. There was only one thing left to do, wait for news from the police. Reason suggested that they would start a search, check the cameras, and put her on the wanted list. But a terrible emptiness settled in my soul. He didn't know if he had the strength to survive the night in this state. The next morning the house was still empty and quiet. Xavier hardly slept. He tossed and turned on the couch for a couple of hours, immersed in anxious thoughts, and constantly checked his phone, hoping that Freya would show up. But the screen remained silent. Around 9 in the morning the doorbell rang. Xavier stood up instantly, hastily unlocking the lock. Detective Lyle Turner stood on the threshold. He was still wearing the same shabby raincoat and the same tired look, but in his hands he was holding a folder with papers. A young man in civilian clothes stood nearby. Good morning, Mr. Lowry. Sorry it's so early, the detective nodded, walking inside. Let me introduce. This is Carter, our computer specialist. We'd like to take a look at your wife's laptop and her phone. Certainly. Come in, Xavier answered quietly, feeling anxiety again squeezing his chest. While Carter was laying out the tools at the table where Freya's laptop had remained turned off last night, Turner took out several sheets of paper from the folder. We collected recordings from nearby street cameras for the period from 8 in the morning to 7 in the evening. There are a couple of things that might be interesting, but nothing obvious yet. We are interested in a camera at an intersection near your home. She spotted a woman in a dark coat who came out at about 7:30 in the evening. But the recording quality is poor, the face is blurry. We cannot say with 100% certainty that this is Freya. In any case, we will continue to check. Xavier felt hope awaken within him. At 7:30, but then she could still. Could she go to some kind of meeting? The detective looked at him carefully. What time did you return home? Around 7. So, theoretically, she could have left half an hour before you arrived. We will finally find out from other cameras if that woman has similar signs. We will confirm this. At this moment, Carter turned cautiously towards them. Detective, can I start working on the laptop? Yes, Turner answered, and then, turning to Xavier, he clarified, tell me, do you have passwords for your laptop or something? Xavier shook his head. She sometimes set passwords, but we didn't always share them with each other. Try Freya 2020 or something like that. It's okay, we can handle it, Carter chuckled. This will take some time. While Carter was connecting his equipment, the detective and Xavier returned to their conversation. Tell us more about your wife. Where did she work? What were her hobbies? Turner asked, taking out his notebook. Freya is a graphic designer, Xavier began in a quiet, slightly shrunken voice. She did freelance commissions, mostly logos, covers, things like that. Over the past couple of months, she seems to have had few projects and has been complaining about a lack of inspiration. It's clear. Which client do you perhaps know who recently communicated with her? I won't say exactly. Fine. We'll try to find the correspondence on her computer or phone when it's charged. Xavier shook his head, feeling completely helpless. Have you noticed that maybe she's been excited about something lately? Or did she have new acquaintances who made you wary? In response, he just spread his hands. She talked with her childhood friends, with her clients, and went to yoga banal things. However, one day I noticed that she was flipping through some websites. What sites? Turner perked up. I don't know for sure, Xavier admitted. When I passed by, it seemed like it was some kind of social network or forum, but I didn't pay any attention. The detective chuckled. Okay, let's see what Carter finds. At that moment, steps were heard from the corridor. It was Officer Ramirez who entered the house with a folder of documents. She greeted Xavier, then turned to Turner. Detective, I collected statements from neighbors. No one saw Freya get into the car. No noise or screams were noticed. One woman, Mrs. Hamilton, from the house opposite, says she saw someone pass her window at about 6 in the evening, but she is not sure it was Freya. It's clear. Everything is very uncertain, Turner sighed. I also wrote down the license plates of the cars that were passing by on the surveillance camera of the cafe on the next street. Maybe we'll find out who was there at that time. While they discussed the plan for further action, Xavier felt completely confused. It seemed to him that he was walking through a maze in absolute darkness, and even the police did not give him a clear answer. Why did she leave? Who could I meet? Or did someone take her by force? But the kidnapping option was not heard out loud in the room. The detectives did not want to scare him until there was serious confirmation. However, the anxiety in Xavier's soul grew stronger. Mr. Lowry, Turner attracted his attention, we have put your wife on the wanted list. If you have any information, call me immediately. You never know, maybe she will make herself known. Of course, Xavier said, trying not to show how depressed he was. Turner took off his cloak, intending to stay a little longer to discuss the details. Tell me, do you have contact information for Freya's close relatives, besides her sister? My parents live in the east of the state, but they are retired and haven't talked much lately. He dictated the address and telephone number, which he knew by heart. Will you contact them? Yes, it will be necessary to clarify whether Freya contacted them. The conversation was cut short because Carter suddenly sat up in his chair and made a gesture asking for silence. Looks like we have a password to the laptop. Now the system will give access. Xavier stared intensely at the screen. Inside, everything was clenching with anticipation. Suddenly, there would be a clue explaining where his wife had disappeared. Come on, he whispered. System windows flashed on the screen, then Carter clicked the mouse. Okay, I'm in the system. Now let's look at the browser history, files. It looks like some of the data has been cleared. She probably deleted her browsing history. But there is something left. I'll try to restore it. Xavier and the detectives moved closer, looking at the monitor. Carter quickly moved the cursor, restoring fragments of deleted data. Interesting, said the specialist. There are traces of visits to some dating sites, or something like that. It's not that obvious, but it looks like she's been on several online dating platforms. Damn, Xavier blurted out. He felt a slight shock. Yes, there was a routine in their relationship, but for dating sites, let me take a look, Turner frowned. Carter opened the browser cache, flipping through some encrypted remains of files. Apparently, she deleted the main correspondence, but some attachments and temporary files remained. We may be able to extract something, but it will take time. Okay, take the laptop and do your thing, Turner ordered. Mr. Lowry, are you sure that you don't know about your wife's hobbies for such sites? No, he answered confidently, although he felt disappointed. She said that she was bored, but I didn't think that she communicated there. I don't understand why. Turner looked down. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Sometimes people go there out of curiosity. But if she was dating or corresponding with someone, this could be an important clue. Xavier's chest tightened even more. Fragments of memories surfaced before my eyes. In recent weeks, Freya often sat at the computer late into the night, brushing him off if he asked what she was doing. He thought it was work. And now it turns out that she probably went to dating sites. Listen, the detective tried to reassure him, noticing the expression on Xavier's face. We don't know the whole truth yet. Specialist Carter, meanwhile, carefully placed the laptop in a protective case. I'll take it to the laboratory. They have powerful data recovery software. I'll let the detective know if I find anything important. Thank you, Xavier replied automatically. Turner looked at his watch. Okay, we will continue to work in other areas for now. Mr. Lowry, if Freya calls you, or if you have any information, please let us know immediately. Of course, Xavier repeated, like a memorized mantra. As soon as the alarm on his phone rang, he jumped up and felt a sharp emptiness in his chest. For 2 days, I haven't heard a word from my wife. The howl of sirens, the distant sounds of the street Portland lived its own life, but everything seemed frozen in one state of alarm. Just as he was about to make coffee, the door opened. Standing on the threshold was Audrey Kinsley, Freya's younger sister. Her short black hair was tousled, and her warm brown eyes looked worried. She was clutching a small bag in her hands. Hello, Zav. Sorry for not calling. I took the morning bus to come to you as soon as possible. Audrey, he whispered, not hiding his relief. It's so good that you are here. Come on in. She took off her jacket and hugged him on the threshold. He felt her trembling. I can't believe Freya has disappeared. I can't wrap my head around it, Audrey said quietly as they walked into the living room. I can't either, Xavier admitted. The police are already looking, but nothing concrete yet. He made her a cup of tea and poured some coffee himself. They sat down at the table in the kitchen. Audrey looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes. Do Mom and Dad know? He asked. Yes, they seem to be in shock, but they can't come now. Dad has serious health problems. Maybe later. I understand, Xavier nodded, looking at her with concern. Audrey sighed, running her hand through her hair. I corresponded with Freya the day before yesterday, but I didn't notice anything strange. She complained that she didn't have enough orders, that's all. Listen, Xavier began, plucking up his courage. The police found evidence that Freya may have been on dating sites. Do you know anything about this? Audrey shuddered and put the cup aside. I guessed. She told me that she was bored, like you and her have grown apart. I didn't support the idea, but she said she was just chatting with someone there, for fun. But I don't think she could have gone that far. Xavier felt a chill run down his spine. His worst guess was beginning to be confirmed. Why? Why would she communicate there? We could talk and discuss problems. She felt that you were both immersed in your own affairs, that your marriage had become, Audrey bit her lip, searching for words, became a routine. But I was sure that she would never leave. He ran his hands over his face, trying to restrain himself. That doesn't mean she ran away, right? I don't believe she could just up and leave, Audrey said firmly. The sister's words rang frighteningly true. Xavier closed his eyes, trying to push away the terrible thoughts. This explains a lot. But so far there is no evidence of abduction or voluntary departure. The police have just begun their investigation. I want to help, Audrey said confidently. This is my sister, and I know her character better than anyone. She would never disappear, leaving all her things behind and without warning. Xavier saw determination mixed with pain in her eyes. He knew that Audrey was always closest to Freya. They shared their deepest secrets. If anyone can clarify the motives, it would be her. Tell me everything you know about her moods, he asked. I feel like I'm missing something important. Audrey sighed and bit her lip. About a month ago, she admitted to me that she misses the old days when you were more romantic. She said that she lacked some emotions. I advised her to talk to you, but she brushed it off. She said that she would figure everything out herself. Xavier felt a surge of guilt, although he understood that not all problems can be solved by a simple conversation. I noticed that she became colder, but I didn't think it was that serious. She felt that you were completely absorbed in work, Audrey continued. But don't blame yourself. Sometimes people just get lost in routine. She loved you, I know that for sure. This is a nightmare. He gently squeezed her hand, trying to support her. We will find her. I'll do my best. Audrey exhaled and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sorry, I just can't believe this is all for real. I understand, he answered quietly. For some time they were simply silent, feeling how this silence weighed on them. Audrey then suggested, let's collect her things and see if there are any clues there. Maybe a notebook. Yes, let's try, Xavier responded. They went up to the second floor and went into the bedroom. The bed was still neatly made, and on the bedside table there was a photograph of Xavier and Freya smiling, hugging each other on the beach where they had been on holiday 4 years ago. His heart skipped a beat. Audrey began looking through the closet where Freya kept her clothes and accessories. Everything looked as if she had never left, no empty hangers, no packed suitcases. Look, she pointed to the corner of the top shelf. This is where her sketchbook usually lies. They took out a sketchbook and flipped through the pages. Most were filled with abstract sketches and design ideas. Nothing remarkable, except for a few strange notes in the margins. Drama, freedom, fatigue. It looked like she was letting her emotions out there, Audrey said thoughtfully. What's here? Xavier opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside was a half-read novel and a pen, nothing else. Everything is in its place. She didn't plan to disappear, the sister noted. They walked around the room, collecting small things. In the chest of drawers, they found old letters, bills, nothing suspicious. No journals other than quick notes in a sketchbook. Then we went downstairs and checked Freya's workplace. But the police had already looked there, and Xavier himself saw it all. No new clues were found. I'm sorry, Audrey sighed. I thought maybe we'd find her phone pad or something she wrote by hand. Maybe she kept everything on her laptop, he suggested. I hope that the specialists will restore the correspondence. Audrey realized that there was nothing more she could do. They returned to the living room and sat down on the sofa. Listen, she said, looking straight into his eyes. I'm not hinting at anything, but tell me honestly, did you have serious problems in your marriage? I'm not looking for someone to blame, I'm just trying to figure it out. Xavier hesitated, searching for words. Problems. No. Yes, lately we have been living as if on autopilot. Work, dinner, sleep. I was doing a lot of my projects, she was surfing the internet. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention to her. But she didn't say she wanted to leave or anything. No, he answered. She sometimes complained that she felt trapped in everyday life, but we never talked about breaking up. Maybe she wanted to tell you something and didn't dare, Audrey suggested. Or I thought that I would find adventures on the internet, but I encountered something dangerous. This thought seemed to burn Xavier. He imagined Freya meeting some stranger and getting into trouble. God, he whispered, running his hand through his hair. I'm scared to even think in this direction. But it may be true. There was a pause. They sat side by side, trying to grasp the reality of what was happening. Outside, the gray drizzle of fall Portland made the atmosphere even gloomier. Maybe you should rest a little, Xavier suggested, seeing Freya's sister rubbing her eyes tiredly. You just got off the road. I came close, she answered. I'll take a few days at my own expense. Can you make a bed for me in the guest room? Certainly. The living room was left in a slight mess after the police and the expert arrived, but having removed the laid-out papers, Xavier made a bed for her there on the sofa so that she would be closer. Audrey was noticeably tired, but he himself felt that his strength was running out. When Audrey settled down on the sofa, covered with a blanket, Xavier went to the kitchen to mindlessly wash the dishes or do something else. However, over and over again, thoughts returned to Audrey's words. She just wanted a distraction. How many times do people read stories where one of the spouses seeks solace on dating sites, only to encounter terrible consequences? And now this is happening in his life. Damn, I have to do something, he whispered, looking at his reflection in the glass of the window. He remembered a story he had once read online. A woman met someone online and suddenly disappeared. Then there was also a routine in the family. He didn't remember how that story ended, but the overall message was ominous. In the silence of the kitchen, Xavier suddenly heard quiet sobs. He went into the living room and saw Audrey, covered with a blanket, crying silent tears. Hey, he sat down next to her and hugged her shoulders. Everything will be fine. I'm sorry, I didn't want you to see me like this, she said, wiping away her tears. I can't imagine where she is now. She's my sister. I know, he answered quietly, but we won't give up. They sat in the twilight for a long time, trying to console each other. Xavier felt the same family connection emerge between them, which they seemed to have lost over the years because they usually communicated on holidays or on family occasions. Now they were united by one grief and one hope to find Freya. At some point, Audrey fell silent, staring at one point. He understood that she was struggling with fear and respectfully did not ask unnecessary questions. Later, she fell asleep, tired from the journey and in tears. Xavier moved into the hallway, took out his phone, and opened his contact list for the umpteenth time that day. Maybe someone from Freya's acquaintances knows something after all, or saw her. But not a single number in his phone could give specific answers. 2 weeks after Freya Lowry disappeared, news reports mentioned her name for the first time. For Xavier, this was both a bitter reminder of the seriousness of what was happening and a glimmer of hope, because often it is publicity in the media that helps move an investigation from a dead point. Xavier sat in front of the TV in the living room and tensely waited for the mention of his missing wife. The presenter of the morning program flipped through the news, reading them out in a dry but confident voice. And then the same phrase came out. Portland police are searching for a 31-year-old woman, Freya Lowry, who disappeared 2 weeks ago under mysterious circumstances. Relatives and friends ask anyone who sees her or has information to contact the police. Next came a terse chronicle. Freya left the house, disappeared, her friends don't know where she is. The name of Detective Lyle Turner was announced as the person in charge of the investigation. A photograph of Freya flashed on the screen, the same one where she is smiling, holding a cup of coffee in her hands. Xavier felt his heart clench into a painful lump. Just recently she was nearby. This smile, kind green eyes. And now her photo is shown on the morning news in the context of missing person. The feeling of surreality washed over him again, just as it had in the first days after her disappearance. Audrey was already sitting in the living room, covered with a warm blanket. She listened to the report with a tense expression on her face. As soon as the announcer moved on to the next news, the sister exhaled sadly. I hope someone calls and says they saw her. After all, sometimes people really respond. Yes, Xavier answered quietly. although I'm scared to hear all this out loud, as if they confirm a reality that cannot be escaped. He turned off the TV. There was a feeling of hopelessness and a faint spark of hope in my chest. Maybe someone really saw her. On the table were already printed leaflets with a photograph of Freya and a request for help. Today Xavier was going to hang them in prominent places and hand them out to passers-by. An hour later, a car from a local volunteer organization drove up to the house, whose employees agreed to help search for the missing person. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all wearing reflective vests. They pulled up to Laurie's house and walked out onto the porch with confident, friendly smiles. Xavier recognized one of the women on the phone. Her name was Molly. She is the coordinator of the group in Portland. "Mr. Lowry," she said to him, squeezing his hand in support. "We have come to help you distribute leaflets and organize searches in nearby areas. I understand how difficult it is for you now, but I swear we will do everything in our power." "Thank you," he answered quietly. "True, any help is important. I don't know what to grab." He led the volunteers into the living room, where Audrey poured hot tea for everyone. Molly laid out a map of the area on the table, indicating the spots where the notices were supposed to be posted. They also wanted to go around a couple of abandoned parks and abandoned buildings. Sometimes traces of missing people were found there if for some reason they were hiding or could not get in touch. "We understood that you already tried to look for her in the nearest parks," Molly said, running her finger over the map. "But we want to check everything again. And then we'll expand. Tell me, do you have any friends who can add information about places where Freya might have gone?" Xavier and Audrey looked at each other. Yes, Freya sometimes liked to walk along the embankment of the Willamette River, but her disappearance happened in the autumn, and it is unlikely that she would go there alone in the evening. Although now, after her disappearance, everything seemed possible. "She loved the embankment," Xavier muttered, "but I'm afraid it's far from our area, and I'm already scared to think that she could just go for a walk." "We'll write this down too," Molly nodded. "We are trying to look at all options." Thus, a search plan for the day was formed. Some volunteers will go to the park, others will post leaflets and distribute them to local establishments. Xavier and Audrey were also going to join them so they could feel like they weren't sitting idle. When the volunteers went to their locations, Xavier and Audrey were left alone at the house. On Molly's recommendation, they shared a packet of leaflets. Xavier sighed, looking up at the cloudy sky. "No matter how much we go out, it all seems insufficient to me. It's like I have to run around the whole world," he said, clutching leaflets in his hands. "It's scary to even imagine that she's calling for help somewhere." "I understand," Audrey said quietly, "but don't blame yourself. You do the best you can, and I will help as much as I can." They moved along the streets, going into shops, cafes, salons, pinning advertisements on bulletin boards, leaving business cards. People looked with sympathy or with indifference. Anything happened. Someone asked, "Is this your relative?" Someone nodded indifferently and took the leaflet. After walking a few blocks, Xavier heard a familiar voice behind him. "Xavier, hey, is that you?" Turning around, he saw Odette Rain, a colleague at work. She was standing on the sidewalk with papers in her hands, probably going to the office. Seeing him with a stack of leaflets, she quickly approached. "Hello, I saw the news this morning. How are you holding up?" There was a genuine, worried question in her eyes. "Honestly, I don't know," he breathed. "I go around, posting leaflets. Maybe someone saw something. Is there anything I can help with?" She suggested, nervously fingering the paper file. "I heard that you teamed up with volunteers. I'm ready to join after work if you need to deliver these announcements." "Thank you," he replied gratefully. "Any help is appreciated." Odette turned her gaze to Audrey and smiled politely. "You must be Freya's sister. Do you look like her?" "I'm Odette, Xavier's colleague." "Yes," Audrey nodded, politely returning the handshake. "Very nice. Thank you for wanting to help." "I don't really know what happened," Odette said a little hesitantly, "but everyone in the office is worried. Xavier, when you decide to return to work, don't worry, we'll support you." The words, "get back to work," stung painfully. He hasn't actually gone to work for 2 weeks now, although he only took a few days of official leave. Colleagues tried to replace him on tasks, but he simply could not concentrate on the code because Freya's face was always in front of his eyes. "Thank you, Odette," he whispered, lowering his eyes. "I'm not ready yet." She nodded understandingly. "Understand. Stay in touch. If anything, call." She left him her number again, although he already had contacts. Then, wishing them good luck, she walked away quickly so as not to be late for the office. Audrey looked after her and asked carefully, "Good girl. She seems very worried about you." "Yes, we are just colleagues." She turned out to be responsive, Xavier replied with a shrug. "I haven't been communicating with anyone there much lately." He didn't attach much importance to the conversation. By lunchtime, Xavier and Audrey reached the main street, where there were various shops, a small shopping center, and a couple of cozy cafes. They have already posted dozens of leaflets. Now we went to the Willamette Brew Cafe, one of Freya's favorite bars, where she sometimes met with friends. The owner of the establishment was a pleasant man named Miguel, about 40 years old, with a neatly trimmed beard. Seeing Xavier's familiar face, Miguel frowned. "Heard the news, buddy. I'm sorry. I met Freya at my place a couple of times. I never thought that she could disappear." "Thank you, Miguel," said Xavier. "Can you hang some flyers here for people to see?" "Of course, hang it on the display window as much as you need, and I'll also share it on my social network page." "Thank you," Xavier repeated. He felt relieved that there were people in town willing to help. He heard a couple of responses from the cafe regulars. Someone claimed to have seen Freya here a week ago. Someone suggested rummaging through personal photo archives to see if Freya showed up somewhere. Unlikely, but any help could provide evidence. In the evening, when twilight fell on the city, the volunteers gathered at the appointed place near the library, where Xavier and Audrey were waiting for a report on the search. Molly walked up to them, running her hand over her reflective vest. We walked around the nearest streets and a park in the south of the area. No traces. We talked to the locals and posted advertisements. A couple of people promised to call if anything came up. "I know this is not what you wanted to hear, but we need to continue." "Yes," Xavier sighed. "I am grateful to you. At least some movement." Audrey, shivering in the cool air, wrapped herself in a scarf. "We're going to continue, aren't we? I'll come tomorrow, the day after tomorrow." Molly nodded encouragingly. "Certainly. We predetermined 3 days of active search. Then we'll take a short break and collect responses. If new leads appear, we will expand the area. In the meantime, don't lose hope. If you need psychological support, we have consultations." "Thank you," Audrey responded, glancing sideways at Xavier. It was clear that she was worried about his condition. After saying goodbye to the volunteers, Xavier and Audrey got into the car and quietly drove home. There was emptiness in his soul. All day he handed out leaflets, looked into other people's eyes, but not the slightest clue about where Freya was. For now. When they returned, there was a box of groceries and a note on the doorstep. "Xavier, I know you don't have time to cook. A little help. Always there if needed. Odette." The box contained fresh vegetables, fruits, a couple of semi-finished products, and a bottle of mineral water. "She came in," Xavier said in surprise, holding the note in his hands. "Nice gesture," Audrey noted. "Really, she's great." "Did you know what she was going to bring?" "No," he shook his head. "Apparently, she decided not to bother me by calling. I just left the groceries." Audrey nodded approvingly and grinned. "Great. I'll have to thank her." Xavier felt a strange mixed feeling, shame and gratitude. The shame is that a woman who is not his family cares so much, while Freya disappeared, and gratitude because this help is really important in difficult times. He prepared dinner himself, using some of the food he brought. She and Audrey ate dinner in silence, only occasionally exchanging short phrases. Several more days passed like this. The story of the missing Freya Lowry appeared in several Portland publications. police gave a reserved comment to reporters, repeating that the case was being investigated, but there were no specific suspects. Flyers continued to be posted throughout the city, and volunteers made rounds several times, but no reliable evidence emerged indicating Freya's whereabouts. Xavier began receiving calls from strangers who allegedly saw a woman similar to Freya either in a supermarket or on a commuter bus or at a train station. But every time the police or Xavier himself checked these tips, they were not confirmed. People were either mistaken or wanted to attract attention to themselves. In the office where Xavier worked, his colleagues showed concern. One evening, before going to bed, he caught himself thinking that he was grateful to Odette for giving him at least a small island of calm. You don't need to discuss extinction theories with her all the time. She simply says, "I'm here if anything happens." And in a strange way, it helps to hold on. In the evening, when it was completely dark and Audrey had already gone to her guest room, Xavier sat on the sofa in the living room and looked at the phone. No calls from Detective Turner, no messages from Freya. The news reports did nothing to change the situation. There was nothing on her laptop either. The volunteers did everything they could at the first stage. How long will this last? He ran his hand over his cheek, where 3-day stubble was already prickling, and noticed that all this time he had practically not taken care of himself. Sleepless nights, disordered eating, eternal worries. Only memories remain of the former neatness. "Freya," he whispered quietly, "where the hell are you?" In the empty house, the air itself seemed to be filled with anxiety. He swore to himself that he would not stop searching until he achieved clarity. But more and more often a nagging thought appeared in her thoughts. What if something irreparable happened to her? Desperately, he rejected the idea. She's alive. She must be alive. Exactly a year has passed since Freya disappeared. It seemed that time had slammed a trap, dragging life into an endless cycle of work, memories, and search. The calendar showed the autumn month of 2021, but for Xavier it was almost no different from last year. There was still the same cold in his soul and endless rain in the air, as if reflecting his inner state. During this year, Xavier tried all search methods. He consulted with a private investigator who, alas, also did not produce results, paid hackers to unofficially hack dating sites, but never got any new information, hired volunteers, printed thousands of leaflets in a new format, and everything was unsuccessful. The police continued to investigate, but Detective Turner honestly said, "We are doing what we can, but without concrete evidence, there is nothing to follow." Audrey, after several months of living with him, returned to her city. She had to work and look after her elderly parents. Nevertheless, she still called often, inquired about news, and sometimes came for a couple of days. Freya's parents' health was deteriorating, and the constant feeling of uncertainty suffocated them. A lot had changed in the office where Xavier worked, but he hardly noticed it. He immersed himself in work, taking on additional projects, overworking, trying to fill his brain with software development tasks. Colleagues looked at him with pity and caution. Over this year, he had noticeably lost weight and became even more withdrawn. However, one colleague, the same Odette Rain, quietly continued to help him, checking if he had eaten, if he had forgotten about the weekend, if he needed help with something. Her silent concern gradually became a ray of light for him. One evening, when Xavier was checking his email in the office for the 10th time that day, Odette approached him with a mug of tea. "I noticed that you never got up from the table today. Drink, otherwise you'll completely die." He looked up and looked at her through his glasses with a tired expression. "Thank you. Sorry for being distracted by me." "Stop it," she smiled softly. "I'm just worried." "How are you completely exhausted?" He shrugged. "Working. It's better than sitting in an empty house, and, well, you know." The words, "and think of Freya," hung unspoken in the air. Within a year, everyone in the office had already gotten used to the idea that Xavier's wife was missing. But no one dared to touch on the topic directly, except, perhaps, Odette, who sometimes cautiously asked about the news. "Maybe after work we can go somewhere so that you can unwind a little," she suddenly suggested. He noticed in her eyes that same warm sympathy that he had begun to detect for a long time. At first it was just participation, but as time went on, he felt that her attitude took on a more personal tone. Something in her gaze indicated an inner attraction. "Thank you, but I..." He paused, not knowing how to politely refuse. "I'm probably not ready for such exits." Odette lowered her eyes. "Understand. Sorry, I didn't mean to push." "It's okay," Xavier hastened to say. "I appreciate your support. Is it true?" He felt a slight awkwardness arise inside. On the one hand, he was almost sure. He could not afford any relationship he was faithful to Freya, even if she was not around. But on the other hand, a year had already passed in silence and loneliness, and the simple human warmth emanating from Odette sometimes seemed saving. That evening, leaving the office later than usual, Xavier arrived home. The empty hallway greeted him with gloomy silence. Once a year ago, he crossed the threshold, expecting to see Freya's smile, or at least hear the noise of the laptop being turned on. There was now dark silence in the corridor. He walked into the living room and automatically turned on the table lamp. He took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. On the shelf was a framed photograph of Freya, the same one used for the leaflets. He couldn't decide to put it somewhere far away. "I promised not to give up," he said out loud, looking at the photo. "But I don't know where to knock next." The phone was in my pocket. Over the past month, he had almost stopped calling Detective Turner. He always answered the same thing. "No new leads. We're keeping the case open, but no information is coming in." Suddenly, he remembered how someone he knew said that Freya had been seen on some dating site under someone else's nickname even before she went missing. "But how can I check this?" Xavier asked himself again. The police said that without passwords they could only partially check the correspondence, and it was impossible to restore deleted accounts. A heavy slab lay on my heart. He felt that he had almost no strength left. It turned out that even a year is not enough time to forget or come to terms with it. The next day, Xavier received a call from Detective Turner. "Mr. Lowry," he said in a deep voice, "do you have a couple of minutes?" Of course, Detective. Xavier immediately tensed. My heart trembled. "Have they really found something?" "Please don't get your hopes up too much, but information has emerged about the work of a hacker who may have been able to steal some of the correspondence from dating sites. We are now trying to verify this information officially, but so far everything is difficult. Warrants, etc., will be required. So there are chances." Xavier breathed, feeling a faint flicker of hope. "The chances are minimal, but it's better than nothing." After a pause, Turner added, "We've been working on this case for a year. Of course it's hard for you. I understand that in such situations you want to know everything. But hacking private servers is the jurisdiction of the FBI, and we are not always given direct access. Evidence must be collected legally. What if this gives some impetus? Maybe it will reveal who she was communicating with. That's why we're trying to act," the detective confirmed. "But you understand, nothing may turn up. Also," Turner's voice became more serious, "keep in mind that if we actually find her active there, it may clarify what she was looking for on these sites. I don't want to be cynical, but prepare for any options." Xavier realized that the detective was hinting diplomatically. The correspondence may indicate Freya's hidden personal life, which her husband may not want to know. But Xavier said decisively, "I'm ready to find out the truth. Better the bitter truth than eternal guesses." "Fine. I'll contact you as soon as there is news. For now, hang in there." The conversation was interrupted. Xavier put the phone on the table and sat silently for a long time. A year has passed into emptiness, and now there is a tiny chance to get answers. Even if they turned out to be unpleasant, he understood that the worst thing was to live in ignorance. That same day, late in the evening, he stayed in the office again. At some point, Odette appeared near his table with a slight smile. "You're sitting here alone again. It's already late." "Yes," he answered absently, closing his laptop. "I don't want to go home." She paused, clenching her hands. "I understand. Listen, Maybe you could still join me for a cup of coffee. Just coffee, without any hint. Xavier looked into her eyes. During this year, she never allowed herself to cross the line, but her gentle sympathy was obvious. He felt that if he agreed, he would take a step after which it would be even more difficult to balance between loyalty to his missing wife and a thirst for basic support. But he was too exhausted by loneliness and painful thoughts. "Okay," he said quietly, "let's go. Just drink coffee." They left the office and headed to a small coffee shop nearby. The evening city glowed with lights, raindrops glistened on the asphalt. Odette walked alongside, taking out an umbrella. "Hold it, please. Otherwise, I'll get all wet again." Of course, Xavier took the umbrella, covering both her and himself from the rain. Their shoulders almost touched, and he felt the warmth of her presence. It was cozy in the coffee shop, smelling of freshly ground beans. They chose a table in the corner. Odette ordered a latte, he ordered black coffee. There was a slight silence as the barista prepared the drinks. Finally, Odette was the first to speak. "You've been living in this nightmare for a year. I see how hard it is for you. I'm sorry if my words seem tactless, but you won't suffer like this for the rest of your life, right?" He looked down. "I don't know. Probably yes. I will suffer until I find out what happened to her. Of course, I understand." But suddenly, she sighed, biting her lip. What if she's no longer alive? Or does she not want to be found? Forgive me for saying this. Xavier frowned, but heard the pain and sympathy in her voice. "I thought about it," he admitted with difficulty. "I can't accept that she's dead or that she deliberately left without a word. But time, it seems to accustom me to the worst thoughts." Odette took his hand for a moment and squeezed. "Nobody has the right to judge you. You are searching and waiting. This is worthy of respect. I just want you to remember that. There are people who care what happens to you next." He took his hand away, feeling his heart beat a little faster. He felt both awkward and pleased. He could no longer deny that a warm relationship with Odette was becoming a lifeline for him. But he still remained faithful to the image of his missing wife, as if one wrong step would be a betrayal. The barista brought coffee, interrupting the emotional tension. Odette smiled and took a latte. "Thank you. And forgive me if I press the point." "No, it's okay." He took a sip of the bitter drink. I really appreciate your support. Is it true, even if I can't answer with anything more yet? I'm not expecting anything now. Just wanted you to know that." They sat in silence for several minutes, enjoying the warmth of the coffee shop and trying to avoid talking about the missing Freya. A year of pain and emptiness may not disappear overnight, but a small spark of trust between two people begins to shine brighter in the darkness. From that day on, Odette began to offer Xavier a little more often to have dinner together or go for coffee. He agreed from time to time, feeling an internal struggle. He could not cross the line because he still considered himself married. But he also couldn't deny that she managed to penetrate his soul with her compassion and care. Sometimes he noticed the glances of colleagues who saw them leaving the office together. This may have led some to speculate, but Odette was discreet enough not to advertise anything, and Xavier himself tried to remain restrained. But you can't deceive your soul. In her presence he felt warmer, and after parting, gloomy thoughts about his wife always returned. Time passed. A year of not hearing about Freya left a deep scar. One day, when the workday was over and Odette stayed in the office until late in the evening, Xavier noticed her leaving her office looking tired. He himself was delayed. He was waiting for a call from Detective Turner, who promised to give an answer today about the hacked data. As a result, the phone did not ring apparently, nothing again. Odette, apparently seeing the light in his office, approached. "Are you here?" "Yes, I wanted to wait for one call, but apparently it won't happen." From a detective. "Listen." She realized. Again hope was shattered by harsh reality. She came up and touched his shoulder lightly. "Come on, I'll give you a ride home. It's on the way anyway." He wanted to say, "Thank you, no need," but realized that he was tired. And he nodded. "I would be grateful." They didn't talk much on the way in the car. Odette turned on quiet music. It was raining outside the window. The city was immersed in autumn lights. When she pulled up in front of Xavier's house, he looked at her with a hard look. "Thank you. And I'm sorry that I don't know how to behave. A year has passed, but I can't. I still don't understand if the person I loved for so many years is alive. It's tearing apart." She smiled sadly. "Don't look for condemnation in me. It's enough for me that you allow me to be around, even if it's just support." He shrank slightly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. "She's not trying to make me forget Freya. It just gives me the opportunity to survive in this hell," he thought. And I felt such gratitude that I almost burst into tears, but I controlled myself. "Thank you," he said, unable to add anything more. Getting out of the car, he went up to the porch, and for the first time in a long time felt that his heart was not so cold. But entering the empty house, I still heard the echo of footsteps, which reminded me Freya had not returned. A few days later, Detective Turner called him, saying that the hacking attempt had not yielded serious results. Freya's deleted accounts could not be restored, and the crumbs of data that were found did not provide clues. As Turner had feared, "Nothing found" was the verdict on this line of investigation. "We'll look for other ways, Mr. Lowry," he said, without going into detail. Upon learning of this, Xavier clearly felt disappointment and invisible fatigue rolling in waves. A year later, he continued to skid in place. By the end of 2022, detectives officially classified the case as a cold case. Police found no body or any evidence that Freya left the state voluntarily. All that remained was to wait for a lucky chance or new evidence. For Xavier, this news sounded like a death sentence, confirmation that life had collapsed irreversibly. Having received a notification from Turner, Xavier sat for a long time in the car parked near the office and looked at the text of the message. Officially, Freya Lowry's case has been classified as cold. If new information becomes available, we will reopen it. He knew that this happened often in the police. If the investigation was unsuccessful for a long time, it was frozen. But seeing this in the context of my own wife was unbearable. His vision was blurry, his throat was constricting, as if someone had squeezed him in a vice. That same evening, he returned home, took off his wet jacket, and walked into the corridor. He stopped in front of the mirror. In 2 years, he had changed noticeably. He had become haggard, aged, constant sadness appeared on his face, the faded half-smile had disappeared. And as if to confirm the new reality, he slowly reached for his ring finger, where he had recently worn a wedding ring, but the ring was no longer there. When exactly did he take off the ring? It's hard to say, maybe a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month. I took it off once without realizing it, and never put it back on. This symbol of marriage seemed to now hang heavily on my soul. "I'm sorry, Freya," he whispered, looking at his own reflection. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing." At work, his reputation as a great developer had tarnished slightly over those 2 years as his psychological state affected his productivity. But the team and management were patient with him. Xavier often stayed after the end of the working day, buried in lines of code, just to avoid returning to an empty house. One day in the office, at about 7 in the evening, when most of the employees had left, Odette approached his desk. "I wanted to invite you to go together to a technology exhibition tomorrow after work. They say it will be interesting there, new products, startups." She smiled shyly. "I understand that this is not the most fun vacation, but it's important for me to be aware of new trends, but somehow I don't want to go alone." He looked at her, wondering if she was hiding some other invitation behind this. But it seemed like she really wanted to have a good time and be with him at the same time. "Sounds interesting," he nodded. "Okay, let's go." "Great." Odette was delighted. "Then let's agree to meet at the office at 6. "Yes, at 6. She went to her desk, and Xavier ran his hand through his hair, feeling guilt and relief fighting inside. The next day, the exhibition passed more or less calmly. They really studied new products and watched startups. Then Odette suggested going to a small cafe for dinner. In the conversation, they unexpectedly brought up the topic of the upcoming winter holidays. I think I'll go to my parents for Christmas, Odette said, leafing through the menu. What are your plans? I have no idea, he admitted. Freya's parents. It's hard for me to communicate with them because they don't have answers either. My own parents live too far away and we don't communicate much. Honestly, I don't see the point in celebrating. You can't live only in grief, she objected softly. Maybe you can try going to your parents, or at least visit Freya's sister. Audrey invited me several times, but I am afraid to see their pain, and I don't have the strength to console them. Odette nodded, understanding. Then she put the menu on the table and looked him in the eyes. Sorry if my question seems strange, but have you ever thought about officially recognizing her as missing? Any legal steps there? I think. He tensed. The words, officially recognize her, sounded like a knife stabbing into the heart. Oregon actually has a procedure that allows a person to be declared dead after a certain period of time or receive permission for divorce. But he internally resisted even the thought of it. I can't, he breathed. This will mean that I have given up. What I decided, she won't come back. I'm not ready. Odette took his hand. I understand. Sorry for starting the conversation. I just watch how you suffer every day. March 2025 arrived as mundane and gray as many other days in Portland. It seemed that spring was about to announce itself with flowers and sunshine, but the weather stubbornly held on to gloomy clouds and frequent rains. In the morning, Xavier left the house, straightening the lapels of his raincoat, feeling the wet asphalt under his feet. He went to the office, as he had done for the last 5 years, trying unsuccessfully to drown out the melancholy and constant feeling of guilt in his work. The day began with the usual routine, checking email, a couple of meetings on Zoom, finalizing the code that he needed to hand over to the customer. Over the years since Freya's disappearance, his face has become overgrown with shadows of the past. Freya's absence had long ago become an unhealed wound that he carried with him everywhere. It was about 12 o'clock, and there was a steady hum of conversation in the office. Xavier was sitting at his desk, staring at the black and white lines of code, when the vibration of his phone on the desk made him jump. He looked at the screen and saw a familiar name, Detective Turner. Turner, he whispered, and his heart immediately began to beat faster. Years have passed since the last meaningful conversation with the detective. All their recent contacts amounted to a polite, "No new evidence, Mr. Lowry, hang in there." "Mr. Lowry, hello." The detective's even but excited voice was heard over the phone. "Sorry to bother you during working hours, but I have news. Very urgent news. You better drive up to the station." Xavier felt his palm become wet from nervous tension. The fingers holding the phone trembled slightly. His imagination flickered between hope and fear. Perhaps Freya had been found. Or worse, they found her remains. What? What happened? He said with difficulty, feeling his throat dry. I would prefer to discuss this in person. Let me just say that there are compelling reasons to believe that your wife is alive. Please come as soon as possible. Xavier exhaled, feeling his entire world turn upside down in 1 second. Hope flared up like a spark in complete darkness. A rush of adrenaline flooded his heart. I'll be there in half an hour, he assured, unable to ask anything else, and ended the call. He grabbed his jacket and notepad and flew out of the office like an arrow. At that time, Odette approached his desk with some documents and saw him getting ready. What's happened? She asked, instantly noticing the panic on his face. It's Turner called, and they had some news about Freya. I can't explain now, he blurted out. Her eyes widened in surprise and sympathy. Let me go with you. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this. No. Xavier shook his head, not realizing why it was so important for him to go alone. Thank you, Odette, but I'm on my own. She nervously squeezed the papers in her hands and looked into his eyes. Fine. But if anything happens, call. I'll be waiting for your call. Xavier nodded briefly and, without wasting any time, hurried to the elevator. His heart was pounding so loudly that it drowned out the noise of the corridor. While the elevator was descending, he looked at the dim reflection in the mirror on the wall of the cabin and could barely restrain himself from panicky thoughts. She's alive, these words sounded in his head, but he was afraid to believe it. The minutes while he walked to the car seemed like an eternity. His hands shook as he inserted the key into the ignition. "Calm down," he ordered himself. "You don't know anything other than what Turner said. Maybe it's some kind of mistake." But some part of his soul seemed to shout, "Here it is, the long-awaited news." The road to the police station was nervous and tense. Xavier drove, automatically following the rules, but everything was confused in his head. 5 years have passed. Was Freya really alive somewhere all these years? What abyss could she have fallen into if she was not found for so long? The Portland police station was located in an old red brick building. When Xavier pulled into the parking lot, he saw several FBI and police cars with their lights flashing. The situation seemed simmering, as if a major operation or press conference was currently taking place there. My heart sank with anticipation. "Please don't let this be a false alarm," he thought as he got out of the car. There was usually a moderate bustle inside the building, but this time everything was much busier. Policemen were hurrying somewhere with folders, FBI agents walked along the corridors, whispering from time to time. Xavier squeezed his way to the duty desk with difficulty. I need to see Detective Lyle Turner. My name is Xavier Lowry." The duty officer took a quick glance at the magazine. "Oh yes, they are waiting for you. Walk along the corridor to the right, room 214. Xavier's legs trembled slightly as he walked down the corridor past many police officers. Thoughts flashed through my head. 5 years. 5 damn years without answers. Now something has happened. Near the doors of room 214, he stopped, took a breath, and knocked. A moment later, I heard a familiar voice. "Come in." The door opened, and he saw Detective Turner in the company of two other people in formal suits, who looked like FBI employees. Turner looked older than he did 5 years ago. The edges of his hair were gray, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. But now his gaze shone with determination and a strange smile, in which one could read relief and fatigue. "Mr. Lowry, thank you for coming so quickly." "Come in," the detective said, pointing to a chair near the table. Xavier sat down, trying to control himself. "As you already understand, there is news about your wife. I don't think you mind if our colleagues from the FBI are also present during the conversation." "No, of course," he answered in a trembling voice. "Tell me what happened. Did you find Freya?" Turner glanced at the people in suits, as if in agreement, and continued. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation, in cooperation with police in several states, conducted a bust of a large network of human traffickers. Their leader is a certain Killian Blake, who operated in several Western states, using dating sites as a cover. This included fake accounts, fake profiles. Women were lured into dates and then kidnapped." Xavier listened to these words, feeling sick. For years he had suspected that Freya might be involved in some kind of crime, but he had never imagined it on such a scale. Among the rescued victims, there is a woman who, according to the documents, passes as Jane Doe, but according to the DNA test, we matched the sample that we had from Freya. That is, at least the woman found in one of the shelters is your wife," Turner continued, looking Xavier straight in the eyes. For a moment, time stood still. The words, "This is your wife," sounded like thunder. Xavier felt that the armor of many years of hopelessness had been lifted from him, and a frenzied mixture of joy and horror rose inside him. "Alive? Is she alive?" he asked in a whisper to make sure he hadn't misheard. Turner nodded. "Yes, she's alive. But her condition, how can I say this? She needs medical and psychological help. Together with other women, she was kept in underground institutions, forced to do various things, including sexual ones. I'm afraid she's been through hell. Now she is in the hospital under the protection of police and doctors." Xavier's breath caught. Goosebumps ran through my skin with horror at what Freya had experienced. He remembered how she simply left the house that evening and never returned. Now everything was taking shape in a terrible picture. Can, can I see her? He squeezed out, realizing that he had to go there immediately to see with his own eyes. Of course, an FBI agent, a middle-aged man with a stern face, entered the conversation. We will accompany you, or if you want, you can get there yourself. There is a special team at the hospital that monitors the safety of the victims. But I believe that a personal meeting will allow you to clarify everything. Xavier, feeling how everything inside was burning, managed to ask one more question. And, what's wrong with this Blake? Was he arrested? Yes, Killian Blake was detained along with several accomplices, explained Detective Turner. They will be charged with a variety of charges related to human trafficking, kidnapping, and violence. Most likely, they will face a life sentence. But at this stage, the main thing for you is to see Freya. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Xavier stood up too, barely stopping himself from running into the hospital. A furious desire to immediately punish everyone involved in this horror flared up in my chest, then a wave of sympathy for Freya, who had gone through unknown horrors. Fine, I'll go. Thank you, he said, unable to find words that could express the depth of his feelings. Turner nodded understandingly and squeezed his shoulder in support. I wish you courage, Mr. Lowry. Freya will have a hard time in the coming days and months, but the worst is already over. When Xavier left the precinct, the day had already passed midday, and the weather suddenly decided to give a brief glimpse. The sun timidly peeked out from behind the clouds. He got into the car and was not immediately able to move. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, his head was spinning from an excess of emotions. Freya is alive. God, she's alive, he thought, closing his eyes. He tried to imagine her in the hospital, what she had become after all these years. Turner said, she needs help. Horrible pictures of violence and pain were painted in my imagination. She, who was always full of life and creativity, spent 5 years in this nightmare. Having typed the address of the hospital that the detective had mentioned into the search on his phone, Xavier drove out onto the road. After driving a couple of blocks, almost automatically, he suddenly realized that he had to tell Audrey, Freya's sister. He grabbed the phone and dialed the number as he walked, but no one answered. It's okay, I'll call you back later, he decided. Or I'll call you when I see everything with my own eyes. Part of his mind demanded that he call Odette. She asked him to keep her informed. But Xavier couldn't talk to anyone right now. He understood that the risk of falling apart while driving was too great. He decided to see his wife first, to make sure that all this was not a dream. Along the way, he kept catching himself with conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, it's an incredible relief that she was found and alive. On the other hand, anger began to boil within him. How could she get involved in this so recklessly? After all, if it weren't for her flirting on dating sites, perhaps the tragedy would not have happened. And most importantly, she hid her communication. It was now obvious that Freya had taken a risk. But of course, no one deserves to become a victim of such a crime. No amount of flirting justifies violence. Lord, this is not the time to blame her, he rebuked himself. We need help. You need to be strong. When he arrived at the hospital, he saw an unremarkable building. Several buildings, a small parking lot, benches. But there was a patrol car at the entrance, and inside in the hall, he noticed 2 police officers, clearly stationed for security. With a pounding heart, Xavier entered and told the guard that they were waiting for him. Your name? Asked the attendant at the front desk. Xavier Lowry. I came to visit Freya Lowry. The duty officer quickly checked something on the computer and nodded. Go to the right wing, room 17B. There you will probably meet an officer who will escort you. Xavier thanked him and walked down the corridor. There was indeed a policeman standing outside room 17B. When he saw Xavier, he clarified something on the radio and then motioned for him to come inside. The doctor is inside. She will explain what condition your wife is in. Xavier entered the room and was struck by the smell of disinfectants, hospital medicines mixed with a subtle hint of cheap soap. The ward was designed for 1 or 2 patients, but now there was only one bed. On it, reclining, was a woman whom he barely recognized at first. There are scars on his arms, abrasions on his face, and his body is painfully thin. A short woman in a white coat stood near the bed, probably a doctor. She turned around when she saw the guest. "Mr. Lowry?" "Yes," he answered, running his gaze over the emaciated figure on the bed. His heart skipped a beat when his eyes met the familiar curve of his cheekbones, familiar features, albeit gaunt. Freya. The doctor came closer and said quietly so as not to disturb the patient. "My name is Dr. Maccabee. I run a rehabilitation program for women who have been released from captivity. We've had your wife since last night. She is currently in a serious condition, both physically and psychologically. Do you have any questions before you approach her?" Xavier swallowed the lump in his throat. "What's wrong with her?" "Well, what injuries?" "She is suffering from extreme exhaustion and dehydration. There are old scars on the back, on the legs, perhaps from violence. She has severe sleep disturbance and general shock. But the main thing is that her life is now out of danger. She faces a long course of physical and psychotherapeutic rehabilitation, and of course, your participation will play a huge role." The doctor's words sounded smooth and professional, but behind them there was a sympathetic gentleness. Xavier glanced at his wife and realized how terrible she looked. Dull, once luxurious hair, sunken cheeks, her eyes are fixed on the sheet, as if she is afraid to raise her eyes. Can I talk to her?" he whispered. "Certainly, but please be gentle. She is very vulnerable. There is no need to pressure her with questions. Let him feel that you are nearby." Xavier nodded strangledly. He himself could barely contain his emotions. As he approached the bed, he felt his legs buckle. He sat down on a chair nearby, took a handkerchief from his pocket, and wiped away the tears that immediately welled up. It was Freya, but it was as if only a shell of the former cheerful girl remained in her. "Freya," he whispered, "it's me, Xavier." She slowly turned her head, and her green eyes pierced his heart. Those eyes had once shone, but now they seemed dim with pain and fear. A surge of emotions was reflected on her face, either relief or fear or shame. A whisper escaped her lips. "I'm sorry. Forgive me." Tears flowed from her eyes, and she covered her face with her hands, curling up into a ball. He leaned slightly towards her, afraid to touch, so as not to scare her. "Hush, hush, shhh, everything is fine." "It's all over," he said, although he himself did not yet know what "everything is fine" means after such a nightmare. Freya sobbed heavily, and Dr. Maccabee put a hand on her shoulder, calming her. "Calm down, Mrs. Lowry. You are safe. Do you want Mr. Lowry to stay?" She nodded weakly, but did not remove her hands from her face. The doctor made a sign that they would leave them alone for a while and went out into the corridor. There was a heavy silence, interrupted only by Freya's muffled sobs. The minutes passed agonizingly slowly. Xavier, gathering his courage, carefully touched her hand. He felt how thin and cold she was. Once he knew every line of her palm, but now it seemed alien, but also familiar at the same time. "Freya," he said a little louder, "you are alive. I hoped. All these years we have not stopped searching. I'm sorry I couldn't find you earlier." She gradually lowered her hands, looking at him with tear-stained eyes. "Don't blame yourself. It's all my fault. If it weren't for my stupidity." She burst into tears again. Xavier felt that he could not cope with his emotions. Anger, pain, sympathy, everything was mixed up. But her mind prompted, now the main thing is her condition. He overcame the desire to reproach her and said softly, "It's not your fault that someone committed a crime. Freya, everything terrible is over. I promise that now we will not let you go to waste. I'm so glad you're alive." She bit her lip, blinking painfully, as if doubting her own right to life. Finally, she said, barely audibly, "I was afraid that you would hate me." Because I cheated on you. I, I don't know how you can even look at me. The mention of betrayal sparked a sharp pain in Xavier's soul. He, of course, already guessed that just flirting could go further since she went on dates, but hearing it head-on was unbearable. However, he realized that he could not break down now. She was not in that condition. "Let's not talk about this now," he said with difficulty. "You need to regain your strength. Then we will discuss everything." Freya closed her eyes, tears flowing down her cheeks. After a while, she sighed shakily. "But I have to say everything. I have to explain why and how I ended up there. I can't keep this a secret, otherwise I won't be able to ask for your forgiveness." Xavier's insides tightened. It would be better if she kept quiet, he thought, because I don't know how I will react. He nodded, silently moving closer to the head of the bed so he could hear her better. Freya swallowed convulsively, trying to collect her thoughts. Her voice sounded quiet and intermittent. "5 years ago. Remember, I was very annoyed that we were both drowning in routine. I felt that we were growing apart, that you were bogged down in work, and I was sitting at home. Sometimes I felt like I was losing myself, and then I registered on a dating site just to feel wanted. It seemed harmless to me. I thought it was just a game." Xavier closed his eyes, remembering how the police eventually found out. She really was on dating sites. But it was painful to hear from her lips. However, he said nothing and let her continue. "At first, I just corresponded with different people. Some of them were quite harmless. But Ryan showed up. He was persuasive, interesting, empathetic, sort of. I got involved in the correspondence." Her voice broke. "Then he suggested meeting. One day, another time, and I agreed. Please don't think that everything happened suddenly. I doubted it for a long time, but I was in such a state that I decided to take a step that I now terribly regret." She sobbed, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Xavier froze. Jealousy and resentment raged in his chest, but he understood that she had gone through hell. Finally, he growled through clenched teeth. "And you met him?" "Yes, twice," she corrected with a bitter smile. "The first time we walked through the park, just chatting. Then I didn't suspect anything. Then there was a second meeting, more frank. We, she covered her face as if unable to speak. We slept in a hotel. I, I know what that sounds like. This is a betrayal towards you, and I have no right to ask for forgiveness. But I'm not lying, Xavier. It was one time. My only betrayal. Then I felt guilty, but he was. He was so." The air in the room seemed to thicken with the weight of the confession. Xavier felt a feverish shiver overcome him. It seemed that of all the versions he had ever imagined, open physical betrayal was the most painful. He saw how she cowered in shame and fear, as if she was preparing for the fact that he would reject her right there. And then the third date, the one where he kidnapped you, he asked, trying to speak evenly, although his voice trembled treacherously. Freya looked down and nodded. "He said he wanted to show me a special place outside the city. I wanted to refuse, but he persuaded me. Then he suggested we drink coffee before that. We got into the car, and then I don't remember anything. I woke up in the basement." She spoke, and Xavier gradually realized the scale of the tragedy. He lowered his head and covered his eyes with his hand. A wave of anger swept through his soul. How could she? But then the realization came. She has already paid for this with the most terrible 5 years in slavery. "Freya," he finally squeezed out, I don't even know what to say. I can't imagine what you went through in those basements. I blamed myself for so many years that I couldn't find you. I couldn't protect you. You're safe now. This is the main thing," he said hesitantly, trying to somehow smooth out the conversation. "And I don't yet know what to do with your confession." She sobbed in response, tears streaming down her sunken cheeks uncontrollably. Finally, managing to find the strength within herself, she reached for his hand, interrupting her shyness. "I understand if you can't forgive me." Xavier felt his heart break. On the one hand, He lived for several years with the bitter certainty that she could have been kidnapped. On the other hand, I never thought that this kidnapping would be a continuation of real betrayal. But she is a victim, tragically in the hands of a network of criminals. How can you hate her if she herself was tortured and humiliated? Yes, there is resentment, but its fate is worse than any accusations. He squeezed her hand gently, despite his internal trembling. I, I don't know how I feel, but I'm glad you're finally saved. She looked at him with gratitude and confusion. They were silent for some time. After some time, Dr. Maccabee returned. Seeing Freya crying and Xavier sitting next to her, she walked up with quiet steps and gently touched Freya on the shoulder. I hope you don't overload yourself with conversations. You need peace. Freya shook her head wearily. I, I told my husband a couple of things that I needed to say. But yes, it's hard for me. The doctor nodded. Understand. Mr. Lowry, I'm afraid the patient needs more rest. Of course, you can come every day, but try not to overstrain her psyche. The more careful we treat her condition now, the more effective the rehabilitation will be. Xavier nodded in understanding. Tears came to his throat, but Xavier held back. He didn't want to cry in front of her, already in shock. He leaned down and touched her forehead with his lips, as if symbolically showing, I still care about you, no matter what. Rest, he whispered. The doctor motioned him to the exit, and Xavier, once again glancing at the emaciated figure of his wife, left the room. In the corridor, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He realized that this day had turned his whole life upside down again. Standing near the white hospital walls, he closed his eyes, let the pain and a strange feeling of acute sympathy pass through him. There was a desire to call Odette just to hear her calm voice. But at that moment, he made eye contact with an FBI agent who was standing nearby. Mr. Lowry, the agent said, do you have time to talk? We need to know some facts. I understand that you just learned about your wife's rescue, but unfortunately, the bureaucracy demands your testimony. Xavier felt uneasy, but nodded. Fine. They stepped aside, and the agent briefly explained what was required of him. A few minutes later, Xavier left the hospital. It was already getting dark outside. He got into the car and sat for a long time without turning on the engine. Emotions were raging inside. On the one hand, incredible relief from the fact that Freya was alive. On the other, the awareness of the terrible truth about her betrayal and 5 years of hell. Deep breath, he commanded himself. You don't have to forgive and understand everything now. The main thing is that she escaped captivity. She needs help. He called Odette, the dial tone went off, and she answered the phone. Zav, what happened? You left for almost 2 hours. Any news? Yes, he said, feeling a lump in his throat. Freya is alive. They found her. There was silence on the phone, then Odette said quietly. Oh God, alive, have you seen her? Yes, she is in the hospital. The condition is serious. I'll tell you later, I can't talk now. But please understand that this is very difficult. Of course, I understand. I don't claim anything. I'm just glad for you that she was found. If anything happens, I'm nearby. Her voice sounded sympathetic. Thank you, he managed. Bye. After finishing the conversation, he felt that I'm happy for you sounded strange. Xavier started the engine and drove home. The next morning, he took a day off from the office and arrived at the hospital early. At Freya's room, he ran into Audrey, who had arrived at night. She looked tired, but when she saw Xavier, her eyes lit up with gratitude. Thank you for telling me right away, she said. I went to see her for half an hour. Oh God, how she suffered. Audrey's voice broke from tears. She bit her lip, clenching her fists tightly. These freaks. I would kill them with my own hands. Xavier nodded, feeling the same. But he didn't say anything, just hugged Audrey briefly. Then together they entered the room. Freya was sitting on the bed with a pillow under her back. Her gaze was slightly blurred, apparently from sedatives. Seeing her husband and sister, Freya was noticeably embarrassed. Finally, Freya looked up at her husband, and her eyes were full of some painful questions. He realized that she was waiting for a decision whether he would say that he was ready to forgive her everything. But Xavier couldn't give a quick answer. He just nodded. "Good morning, Freya. How are you?" "Are you really interested?" she asked quietly. "Or are you just out of sympathy?" "I care," he replied. "I want to know what the doctors are telling you. What are the treatment plans?" She exhaled heavily. "Dr. Maccabee says I have a long course of therapy ahead of me, so I can stay here for a few weeks until I get stronger." "That makes sense," Audrey intervened. "Xavier and I can take turns. One will be on duty here so that you don't feel abandoned." Xavier nodded. "I just don't know," Freya said, closing her eyes for a moment, "whether you want to stay with me after what I did." Again this question, painful and open. Audrey glanced sideways at her brother-in-law, understanding flashing across her face. She apparently did not know the whole truth, but she guessed something. Xavier pursed his lips. "Let's not rush into decisions. The most important thing now is your health." She wanted to say something, but remained silent, casting a sad look at him. Maybe she felt that during the years of separation he, too, had changed. They both became strangers. Over the next few hours, Xavier, Audrey, and Dr. Maccabee talked about the treatment plan, the paperwork that needed to be completed, the testimony that Freya would have to give against Killian Blake and his gang. Horrifying details emerged in the conversation. The FBI wanted to involve all the victims in giving evidence. Freya will have to talk about how she was held, how she was transported from state to state. Xavier listened to this with an icy heaviness on his heart. Every time Dr. Maccabee mentioned in passing, Freya was forced to do, his stomach tightened. How to process the idea that she had been abused by dozens or hundreds of people over those 5 years. He himself did not ask direct questions, realizing that this was a painful topic for her, but a terrifying reality stood between them. Before leaving, Xavier sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm faithful I'll be there tomorrow, okay? If anything, call me." Freya nodded weakly, but it was clear that she was afraid to let him go. "Okay, just don't disappear." He stood up and headed towards the exit, feeling Freya's gaze catching up with him, filled with pain and guilt, and at the same time hope. It's been a month since Freya Lowry was found alive after 5 years of nightmare. During this time, much has changed, but much has remained the same, at least in Xavier's soul. The morning of April 10th, 2025 was cool and clear, a rarity for Portland at this time of year. The sun was breaking through thin clouds, reflecting in the puddles on the asphalt left after the night's rain. Xavier drove to the rehabilitation center where Freya was now, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. An endless stream of thoughts was spinning in his head, which he could not drown out either with music or morning coffee. During this month, he visited her almost every day. Sometimes they were silent, sometimes they exchanged short phrases about the weather or her well-being. Sometimes she tried to talk about the past, but he gently cut her off, not ready to delve into what was still burning him from the inside. Today, however, he felt that this conversation was inevitable. The decision he had been nurturing in recent weeks was ripe, and it was impossible to postpone it any longer. The rehabilitation center was located in a quiet suburb of Portland, surrounded by neat lawns and low trees. The building looked modern, with large windows and white walls that exuded a sterile cleanliness. Xavier parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a few minutes, staring at the entrance. Inside, he was greeted by the familiar smell of antiseptic and the slight hum of nurses' voices coming from the reception desk. He told the attendant his name, and she smiled and pointed down the corridor. "Mrs. Lowry is in the restroom on the second floor. She's waiting for you." Xavier nodded, feeling a heaviness growing in his chest. As he climbed the stairs, he tried to collect his thoughts, but they slipped away like sand through his fingers. He didn't know how to begin, how to choose words so as not to hurt her more than she had already been wounded by life. The lounge room turned out to be bright and cozy. Soft sofas, a couple of bookshelves, large windows overlooking the garden. Freya was sitting by the window in an armchair, wrapped in a warm blanket. Her hair, once long and shiny, was now cut short, a consequence of having been cut off due to its poor condition after captivity. She looked better than in the first days in the hospital. Her cheeks were slightly rounded, her skin acquired a healthier shade. But her eyes, they were still clouded with pain and fear, although something new now appeared in them, a faint glimmer of hope. Seeing Xavier, she smiled faintly and put down the book she was holding. "Hello," she said quietly, her voice soft but trembling. "Hi," he replied, coming closer and sitting on the chair opposite. "How are you today?" "Better," she shrugged, fiddling with the edge of the blanket. "Dr. Maccabee says I'm making progress. Physically, at least. Psychologically, it's more complicated." Xavier nodded, looking at her. He remembered how the doctor explained what could have left these marks. Every time he saw them, a wave of anger rose in his chest, not at her, but at those who did this. "I'm glad you came," Freya continued, looking down. I keep thinking about what to tell you. And every time I'm afraid that you won't want to see me anymore." "Freya," he began, but she raised her hand to stop him. "No, please let me tell you. I have to." She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "Xavier, I know what I did. I know that I betrayed you not only by leaving on that date, but also by hiding everything from you. I was selfish, stupid. I thought I could just play with fire and not get burned. And this is what it led to." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, holding back tears. Xavier looked at her, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. "I'm not asking you to forget," she continued, lowering her hand and looking into his eyes. "I know that this is impossible, but I beg you to give me a chance. Give us a chance. I'm not who I used to be, and you probably aren't either. But I still love you, Xavier. I still want to be with you if you can, if you want to forgive." Her words hung in the air, heavy and fragile at the same time. Xavier felt his heart clench with pain and pity. He saw that she was sincere, her tears, her trembling voice, her look, full of despair and hope. But something inside him broke even then in the hospital when she admitted to cheating. And during this month, he realized that he could not overcome this. He was silent for a long time, looking out the window where the wind moved the branches of the trees. Finally, he turned to her, trying to speak evenly, although his voice was trembling. "Freya, I'm glad you're alive. You can't even imagine how afraid I was that you were gone. For 5 years I lived with this emptiness, with this guilt that I could not protect you. And when you were found, it was like a miracle. I am grateful to fate, the police, and everyone who pulled you out of that hell." She nodded, wiping away tears, but anxiety flashed in her eyes. She felt that something else would follow these words. "But I can't live with this," he continued quietly, looking straight into her eyes. "I can't live with what you did. I understand that you did not want this outcome, that you became the victim of a terrible crime. And I don't blame you for what happened to you later, but what happened before. Your betrayal, your decision to hide it from me. I can't forget it, and I can't pretend that everything will be the same." Freya froze, her face turning pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but only let out a choked sob. "Xavier, please." She began, reaching out her hand to him, but he gently pulled away. "I'm sorry," he said, feeling like everything was collapsing inside. "I've thought about this every day since you told the truth. I tried to convince myself that I could get past this for you, for what we had. But I can't. Every time I look at you, I see not only the Freya I loved, but also the one who went on a date with someone else. And it's eating away at me." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Xavier felt like a monster, but he knew he had to be honest with her and with himself. "I don't want to torture you," he continued, trying to speak more softly. "You've been through hell, and you need time to recover. I want you to have this opportunity, but I'm filing for divorce." The word divorce sounded like a thunderclap. Freya lowered her hands, looking at him with horror and disbelief. "Divorce?" she asked in a whisper. Are you? Are you serious?" "Yes," he nodded, trying not to look away. I already spoke with the lawyer. Oregon has a law ORS 107.025. It allows you to dissolve a marriage if irreconcilable differences arise between the spouses, due to which life together becomes impossible. This is our case, Freya. I don't see any other way out. She was silent, her lips trembled, and tears flowed down her cheeks without stopping. Finally, she squeezed out, "Do you hate me?" "No," he answered quickly, almost sharply. "I don't hate you. I... I still care about you. But love, what was between us, it broke, and I can't fix it." Freya clutched the blanket in her hands, her fingers turning white from tension. She looked at the floor, as if trying to find answers there. I... I understand," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I can't blame you. After everything I've done, I just hoped, stupidly hoped that you could forgive me." "I'm sorry I can't," Xavier replied quietly, "but I won't leave you. I will arrange payment through a lawyer $20,000. This will help you get back on your feet while you recover." She looked up at him, full of pain and surprise. "Money? Do you think I need money?" "I don't think you need money," he objected. "I think you need time and support. That's all I can give you now. I don't want you to be left with nothing." Freya shook her head, but did not argue. She looked down again, and a heavy silence fell in the room. Xavier felt his heart being torn apart, but he knew he had made a choice. There was no turning back. "How long? How long will it take? Divorce?" she asked finally, without looking up. "According to the law, if you don't challenge, the process will take about 90 days, he replied. "I will ask the lawyer to arrange everything as quickly as possible and without unnecessary complications." "I won't argue," she said quietly. "If that's what you decide, I'll accept it." Her words sounded like the final verdict on their marriage. Xavier nodded, feeling his insides grow colder. "Thank you," he said. "It's time for me to go. But if you need anything, you know where to find me. I can't imagine what you've been through, neither have I, and I don't see the point in executing you any further. You've more than redeemed yourself, but our marriage is over." She didn't answer, just nodded, continuing to look at the floor. Xavier stood up, took one last look at her hunched figure, and left the room. Closing the door behind him, he leaned against the wall in the hallway, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. He did it. He said what he had to say, but that didn't make it any easier. The following days passed in a strange fog. Xavier handed over all the documents to the lawyer, and the divorce process officially began. He tried to stay away from the rehabilitation center, conveying a request to Audrey to visit Freya and update him on her condition. Audrey, although shocked by his decision, did not condemn him. "I understand why you did this," she told him on the phone a couple of days after talking with Freya. "But it's hard for her, Xavier. She cries, blames herself." "Thank you for looking after her," he replied, relieved that Freya was not left completely alone. I just want her to get better." "She can handle it," Audrey assured, "over time. And you? How are you?" "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "For now, I'm just living day by day." After this conversation, Xavier returned to work, trying to fill the void with his usual routine. But Odette was waiting for him in the office. She didn't bother asking questions, but her looks, her cautious gestures of support spoke for themselves. She knew about Freya's return, she knew about her condition, but she did not know about Xavier's decision to file for divorce. He did not yet dare to tell her. Late evening in the warm spring of 2025. The quiet corridors of the Portland Federal Court seemed deserted, with only the occasional passing of tired employees, some with stacks of papers, some with court files. Xavier Lowry sat on a bench in the hallway, nervously tapping his foot. Although he did not need to be here at such a late hour, he had already given all his testimony earlier. He felt that he had to wait for the finale. A few minutes earlier, he had seen lawyers, court assistants, and FBI agents enter the courtroom. Audrey Kinsley, Freya's sister, waited quietly on the bench opposite him. She was clearly scared and anxious to be in this place where her sister had testified about her tragedy a few weeks ago. How long to wait? Audrey asked, clutching a thin folder of papers to her chest. There was concern in her eyes. I don't know, Xavier replied, shrugging. It seems the jury has already reached a verdict, and the judge is now formulating a decision. Next to them sat another woman, tall and thin, with short cropped hair. She was one of the volunteers helping the victims. Xavier met her casually, but did not remember her name. It was clear from the expression on her face that this matter affected everyone who had encountered Blake's gang. Xavier knew that Freya would not be present today. Her condition remained fragile, and the therapists at the rehabilitation center felt that confronting all this again in court would only add to her trauma. She, like the others, had already given exhaustive testimony, which formed the basis of the accusation. Now all that remained was to hear the verdict. I hope this freak gets his due, Audrey breathed, so that he never causes harm again. Xavier nodded, feeling the familiar wave of indignation echo within him. At that moment, the massive oak doors opened slightly, and one of the court assistants, a thin man with glasses, waved his hand. Those who are waiting for the outcome of the case of the United States against Killian Blake can enter. The judge is ready to announce the decision. Xavier stood up, exchanging glances with Audrey. She stood up slowly, as if afraid that her legs would give way. They walked into the hall, where reporters with notepads, several FBI agents, and ordinary people who had connected their lives with the victims were already sitting. In the defendant's cage at the front were Killian Blake and two of his closest accomplices. I ask everyone to stand up, the bailiff announced loudly. Judge Walter Bringhurst announces the verdict. They stood up. The judge, a man of about 60, tall and slightly heavyset, with a stern face, stood up and looked around the room. Sit down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the jury has found defendant Killian Blake guilty under a number of federal statutes, including 18 US Section 1591 sex trafficking. Taking into account the aggravating circumstances and the scale of the crimes, the court decides. Life imprisonment without the possibility of early release, the judge read monotonously. As for the accomplices, they are also given the maximum permissible terms of imprisonment. He spoke for several more minutes, listing points, subgroups of charges, and describing the complex structure of the gang. But for Xavier, the main phrase has already been said. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This meant that Killian Blake and his men would not go out and ruin anyone's lives anymore. A rumble swept through the hall. Reporters rustled, recording details. The FBI agent standing by the aisle breathed a sigh of relief. One of the victims sitting nearby applauded, but the bailiff immediately called for silence. Xavier felt something inside him as if it was breaking off a big heavy piece that had been weighing on him all these months after Freya's return. Partly, he realized that he had been waiting for precisely this day, the day when the law would severely suppress evil. That's it. He won't be able to come back and harm anyone. He thought. Thank God, Audrey whispered, closing her eyes. I hope Freya can breathe easier now. When the judge declared the hearing closed, people began to rise. A mixture of feelings was visible on their faces. Some were relieved, some were in tears, some were angry. Xavier and Audrey walked out of the hall together, as if supporting each other. Will you go home now? She asked. Probably, Xavier confirmed. Then he added, and you? I still stayed in the city for a day. Tomorrow I will go to my parents. Let them know that the case is closed, even though it has a terrible ending. But maybe they will feel calmer. Xavier said goodbye to her with a short hug and, leaving the courthouse, felt the night breeze blowing through his light jacket. Somewhere in the depths of his mind, he understood. The day he dreamed of, for justice to be done, had finally arrived. But there was not rejoicing in my heart, but quiet fatigue. It's time to move on, he thought. The cinema lobby was bustling. Crowds of people, neon signs, the aromas of fresh popcorn and vanilla ice cream. While colleagues bought tickets, Odette and Xavier stood at the snack counter. Which one will you take? Salty or sweet? She clarified, pointing to the menu. Sweet, probably. Now I want something less harsh, he replied, laughing at his own joke. Okay, I'll take the sweet one too. Or maybe another cola or soda. Come on, he nodded. While the line moved, they silently glanced at each other. Finally, when the sales guy put 2 servings of popcorn in bright buckets and poured soda, Xavier insisted that he wanted to pay for both servings. Consider that I invited you, he said, holding out the bill. Well, okay, I persuaded you, she smiled, slightly embarrassed. Thank you. They stepped aside to wait for the others. Listen, she turned to him quietly. Of course, I understand that all of our colleagues are here, but maybe, then we can have dinner together, no crowd, if you're not too tired. He felt an exciting jolt in his chest. With pleasure. I've been wanting to talk alone for a long time. And not just about work, he added, giving his voice a slightly more intimate tone. Odette gave him a grateful look. Then we agreed. After the movie, let's break away from our group and go somewhere quiet, okay? Okay, he nodded, feeling a slight shiver of pleasant excitement. At that moment, Lori and the rest of her colleagues came up and discussed who was sitting where. It turned out that everyone took the tickets separately, but with the condition, meet me later at the entrance. The session was about to begin. Let's go, take our seats, Odette suggested. Let's go, Xavier responded. As he left for the cinema, he caught himself for the first time in a long time not feeling guilty or ashamed for going to see a film. With another woman, not with Freya. The film turned out to be an exciting science fiction story about a group of scientists who accidentally discovered the technology of traveling between parallel worlds. While watching, Xavier followed the events with curiosity, several times sincerely smiling at ridiculous moments or interesting dialogues of the characters. He felt the tension of the last few months lift slightly. Odette sat nearby, occasionally pausing to grab a handful of popcorn or take a sip from a glass. Sometimes their eyes met, and she smiled faintly, as if saying, "You see, we can live, we can experience joy." When the film ended, the credits began to play. Xavier stood up, stretched, and turned to Odette. Not bad, right? Yes, I didn't even expect such a level of graphics and plot, she answered animatedly. How do you like the idea of parallel worlds? Interesting, but too fantastic. Although who knows, maybe someday science will come to this. They walked towards the exit. People gradually filled up in the foyer. For some time, my colleagues and I discussed the assessment of the film and what is the brightest moment. Lori then said, "Listen, we also wanted to go to a bar on the next street. Will you join?" Odette exchanged glances with Xavier. He realized that they had their own plans. "Probably not. I think we'll take a walk ourselves," he answered. "Oh," Jacob said mysteriously and winked. "Okay, let's not interfere. This is also correct. One cocktail in a bar and tomorrow we won't be able to write codes in the morning." Everyone laughed. Xavier and Odette said goodbye to the company, wishing them a fun time, and went outside. "Well, shall we take a walk or go straight away?" Xavier asked. "We'll probably go for a walk. I would like to move a little after sitting in the hall. There are a couple of cozy cafes here where you can have dinner if you haven't had your fill of popcorn yet." He laughed. "Let's find something more serious." They chose a small restaurant, Casa Bella, specializing in Italian cuisine. It was dim inside, only the soft light of table lamps, shadows playing on the walls, and soft music. There weren't many people around at that time, so they were quickly shown to a table in the corner. The menu was Italian style: pastas, pizzas, risotto, various salads. They ordered lasagna, capre salad, and a glass of red wine. When the waiter left, Odette leaned back in her chair and looked at Xavier. "Frankly, I didn't think that you would agree to dinner. Well, not only with me, but in general. It seemed to me that you were completely immersed in your pain and detachment." Xavier, clasping his hands on the table, hesitated to answer. "To be honest, I struggled for a long time with feelings of guilt, as if I was cheating on her even with my thoughts. But we are getting divorced, you know." "Yes, I heard," Odette nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Sorry if I ask stupidly, But are you hesitating about divorce? No, he answered calmly. I've thought it over. I really sympathize with Freya. We communicate, but I cannot reconsider the decision. Too much has been destroyed. She understands this. I see. Odette lowered her gaze, realizing that questions about the past were unnecessary. There was a short pause, which was broken by the waitress approaching, bringing wine. Xavier took a sip, feeling a pleasant warmth spreading through his chest. I want to thank you, he said quietly, looking into Odette's eyes, for everything you did, for your support, for not pressuring me when I needed time, and for not disappearing, seeing how I was always self-absorbed. She smiled. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be near you. Believe me, I perfectly understood how hard it was for you, and I didn't want to intrude into your personal tragedy. But the truth is, I care what happens to you. I see that, he admitted with relief, and I would like. He paused for a moment, searching for words. I would like us to spend time together more often. I've been hiding in my shell for too long. Odette gently took his hand, which was lying on the table. He responded with a slight squeeze, and this gesture said more than words. Oh, Xavier, she whispered, I'm glad we can talk about this openly. And I don't expect you to rush into a new relationship. Everything can go as usual, but I have long felt something more than friendly sympathy for you. Looking at her face, at her sincere eyes, he felt a wave of warmth cover him. I have the right to happiness, he reminded himself. I think we should give each other a chance, he said with a smile that suddenly seemed the most sincere he had seen in years. No rush, as you say, but together, Odette finished for him. Yes, together, he repeated. At that moment, the waiter brought the order, delicious lasagna and fresh salad. The wine had a slight berry aroma. The whole atmosphere seemed to be specially created for a romantic evening. Xavier felt as if he was in some new space of life, where there are no ghosts, there is only slight excitement and quiet joy. By the way, Odette said, cutting the lasagna, when do you plan to finish the project that the boss asked for? Did you say Friday? Xavier snorted slightly, smiling. Listen, I'm trying to tune in to a romantic wave, and you're talking about work, he joked. But yes, I will finish by Friday, don't worry. She laughed. Sorry, professional deformation. Okay, no more talk about work. Not a word, he agreed. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.